It's 1280 BC. You're somewhere on the Eastern Desert Road, 2 days out from the Nile Valley and 6 days from the gold mines. The sun isn't just hot. The sun is methodical. It comes in from above, reflects off every rock face around you, and radiates back up from the sand you're walking on, which means the heat is hitting you from 3 directions simultaneously, and every surface in this landscape is helping it. You have 1 ceramic water jar. 1, you've been rationing since yesterday morning, which means your body has been running below minimum hydration for over 24 hours, and your body keeps exact accounts. Your mouth has gone past dry into something stranger, where swallowing feels like a decision you have to consciously make instead of something that just happens. Your legs are answering instructions with a half-second delay. There's a headache behind your eyes that moved in so gradually you didn't notice it arrive. Here's the thing about dehydration that nobody warns you about. It doesn't announce itself. You don't feel your cognition declining. You feel slightly off, slightly slower, and then you cross a threshold you can't feel yourself crossing. And the next person who tries to have a conversation with you notices before you do. By the time the dramatic symptoms show up, the confusion, the inability to hold a thought, the moment decision-making simply stops the window to reverse it has already closed. You're running the calculation. Distance remaining divided by water, left divided by the rate you're losing it, which goes up with heat and exertion, and you've been doing both since before dawn. The answer keeps landing in the same place. Not fine, not plenty of time, close, but you're not panicking. Because there was a stele back at the last waypoint carved stone, sitting on the roadside where the light catches it, impossible to miss, and it told you exactly where the next well is. 18 kilometers. Someone measured this road. Someone mapped every water source along this route, calculated how far the gaps between them could safely be for a column of loaded men in this heat, and marked it in stone so every person who came after would know. That stele wasn't an act of kindness. It was put there because the state had read the casualty numbers and decided the deaths were costing more than the engineering. There's a specific kind of cold arithmetic in that, and it is one of the most Egyptian things you will ever encounter. So today we're going into the part of this civilization that never ends up on the museum poster. Not the gold masks, not the famous tombs, the water logistics, the supply rations, the road network, the expedition records, the crossings that didn't make it, and what the state learned from them. And the fact that the ancient Egyptians feared dying of thirst so personally and so viscerally because they had watched it happen on real roads to real people that the fear followed them all the way into their theology. And they asked their gods to protect them from it on the other side of death as well. By the end, you'll understand something about Egypt that the museum lighting doesn't show you, because museums don't photograph dry. Let's go. Here's what nobody tells you about Egypt in the desert. We picture this civilization pressed up against the edge of the Nile, treating the sand on both sides like a wall, surviving by staying on the right side of it. That picture is wrong in a very specific way. Egypt didn't fear the desert. Egypt needed it the way a city needs a power grid, non-negotiable, wired into the foundation. The gold was in the desert. The copper for every tool Egypt ever made was in the Sinai. The turquoise decorating royal crowns and burial amulets came from mines in the Sinai that were being actively worked from at least the 3rd dynasty, around 2600 BC, and probably before that. The greywacke for the finest royal sculpture, the quartzite for colossal statues, the granite for obelisks all in the desert or at the desert's edge. Every impressive material Egypt used to build the version of itself it wanted history to see came from terrain that would kill you if you miscalculated. So Egyptian desert expeditions weren't occasional emergencies. They were an industry, regular, state-funded, professionally organized, and running on multiple fronts simultaneously. The Wadi Hammamat quarries in the eastern desert were worked by expeditions from virtually every significant dynasty. The walls of the wadi are covered in carved expedition records left by operations spanning 3,000 years of continuous use. The turquoise mines at Serabit el-Qadim in the Sinai were worked so consistently that the state eventually built a temple there to support extended campaigns. The gold mines of the Eastern Desert and Nubia were the financial engine of multiple dynasties, which means Egyptian desert operations had to become an engineered system, not an improvised one. A civilization that moves large numbers of people through lethal terrain multiple times a year, every year, for 30 consecutive centuries will stop treating that as a crisis and start treating it as a logistics problem. And a logistics problem has an administrative solution. Water infrastructure, supply protocols, route documentation, ration formulas. The question was never whether Egypt would go into the desert. Egypt had no choice. The only question was whether the people going in would come back. And that question turned out to have a system for an answer. Let me tell you about a monument that should be in every book about ancient administration and is in almost none of them. It's around 1280 BC, early in the reign of Seti I. There's a road running through the eastern desert toward the gold mines of Akuyati, one of the most economically important routes in the empire. Gold flows out along it, and that gold funds temples, armies, and the political machinery of the most powerful state in the ancient world, and workers are dying on it. The stele at Kanais, carved into the rock face of the Wadi Mia, where it still is, where you can go stand in front of it right now, records Seti first acknowledging this problem in language that is unusually direct for a pharaonic monument, which tend toward extended triumph and very little problem acknowledgement. The text notes the road is harsh, there's no water, workers going out to the mines are dying of thirst before they arrive. And then, in a detail I enjoy entirely, the inscription notes that earlier kings had complained about exactly this problem and done nothing about it. The commentary on those predecessors is not subtle. It is the oldest documented version of having to fix what the last person broke, and it reads just as smug in ancient Egyptian as it does in English. Seti, the first solution, was a temple with a well. Formally, it's a religious monument dedicated to Amun and several other gods. Functionally, it's a water checkpoint on the road to the gold mines dressed in the costume of a temple, because that was the idiom in which ancient Egyptian infrastructure was announced. The temple at Kanais served its gods and served as the last reliable water source before the deep desert, and both of those things were simultaneously and completely true, and the Egyptians saw absolutely no contradiction in that. The network extended from there. Under Seti I and Ramesses II, the Eastern Desert Road System developed into something more comprehensive marked waypoints, recorded distances, maintained water sources along the primary routes from the Nile to the mines. We know this from the inscriptions that survive, and from the simple fact that the expeditions recorded afterward kept coming back. That's evidence of a functioning system in itself. The Western Desert operated on the same logic at larger scale. The Oasis Circuit, Karga, Dakhla, Farafra, Bahariya ran through some of the most arid terrain on the planet. Not just naturally occurring lucky stops, managed checkpoints, officials stationed there, wells maintained, roads between them surveyed and cleared. The state treated water access across the Western Desert the way a modern highway department treats bridge maintenance not optional, not seasonal, a continuous obligation that costs lives when it lapses. Now, the question of how much. The Wadi Hammamat inscriptions are one of the densest bodies of ancient logistical documentation that exists. Expedition after expedition carved their records into the wadi walls on the way in and the way out, dynasty after dynasty, and the cumulative result is a 3,000-year operational archive for one of the ancient world's most consistently used desert routes. From these records, we can reconstruct the general anatomy of a major Egyptian desert expedition. An expedition leader carrying genuine administrative authority. Under him, quarry workers, soldiers, water carriers, donkey handlers, supply administrators running the count, physicians, priests, then the animals primarily donkeys, the standard pack animal of Egyptian long-distance logistics loaded with food, tools, and water. The water moved in ceramic jars. A fixed number of jars per man per day. A fixed number of days in the crossing. a fixed number of donkeys to carry the total. Those numbers were calculated, not estimated. Consider the scale of what that calculation involved. At a bare minimum of 2 to 3 liters of fluid replacement per person per day in extreme heat, and that's assuming rest. Not hauling stone through a desert wadi, a major expedition of 10,000 men needed somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 liters of water for a 10-day operation. Somebody had to count those jars. Somebody had to load them onto those donkeys. Somebody had to check the number before the column moved. And somebody had to have enough institutional knowledge to know what the right number was. Here's the thing. Egyptian expedition administrators couldn't explain dehydration. They had no concept of what was happening physiologically when a body ran out of water, no framework for why the brain shuts down before the body does. No model for why a man dying of thirst can stop knowing he's dying before he's dead. What they had was centuries of expeditions and the accumulated record of which ones came back. That record, retained and passed forward across generations, was functionally as precise as any modern hydration research. The ration formula was someone else's failure, distilled into a number, written into the procedure, and handed to the next expedition leader so he wouldn't have to pay for the same lesson twice. The ones who didn't come back left a different kind of record. The stele at Kanais exists because men died on that road before it existed. That's the only reason it needed to exist. Pharaohs don't build water infrastructure in the desert if the desert has never been a problem. Seti I read the death toll, concluded the cost of fixing the route was lower than the cost of continuing to lose workers to it, and ordered the well built. The monument is the archaeological fingerprint of a mortality problem that reached the most powerful desk in the world. There are other traces, expedition inscriptions that log personnel at departure and don't record the same number returning. References in the Eastern Desert, texts to workers who perished on the road, written in the same flat administrative language used to record every other variable. That flatness is one of the stranger things about ancient record keeping. A man's death and a jar count occupy the same column, the same tone, the same register. There is no pause. The record simply continues to the next item. The large, well-organized expeditions we have full records for were not the first attempts at those routes. They were the refined versions, built on the foundation of earlier operations that established through failure where the water actually was, how long the crossing genuinely took, and what happened when the planner's estimate and the desert's reality diverged. Most of those earlier failures don't have surviving inscriptions. We have the successful operations that came after them and the infrastructure decisions that connect them. The Egyptians learned about desert thirst the way every pre-modern civilization learned about lethal terrain, by entering it, losing people, recording what they could, adjusting the procedure, and going back. What made Egypt different was continuity, a writing system, an administrative apparatus, and institutional memory that persisted across dynasties, so each expedition could inherit the hard knowledge of every expedition before it. The man who survived the Eastern Desert in 1280 BC because Seti I had ordered wells was alive because someone before him had died without one, and the state had been paying enough attention to notice. Now here's the thing about the water infrastructure, the ration math, the mortality reports, and the wells drilled into the rock face of the Eastern Desert. That's all one half of Egypt's answer to thirst. The other half lives somewhere nobody thinks to look for it. The fear of dying of thirst didn't stay on the road, it followed the Egyptians into their theology. The Book of the Dead is a collection of spells assembled to help the deceased navigate the afterlife. Most people know the weighing of the heart, the scales, the feather, the judgment scene that ends up on every museum wall. What doesn't make the museum wall is that the Book of the Dead contains a chapter dedicated specifically to protecting the dead from thirst in the realm of the dead. Not metaphorical thirst, not spiritual dryness as abstraction. Thirst, the kind that kills you. There's a chapter preserved across multiple papyri, copied and recopied across several centuries, whose explicit purpose is to allow the deceased to drink water in the underworld and not suffer from thirst there. The text petitions the gods to bring water to the dead. The language is the register you use when you are asking for something you will not survive without. Go further back, and it's already there. The pyramid texts, the oldest religious corpus in the world, written for pharaohs of the 5th and 6th dynasties over 4,000 years ago, contain utterances asking that the dead king not be thirsty, that water be brought to him, that he not be cut off from it in the afterlife. In the coffin texts that followed, extending the same protections to non-royal Egyptians, the same fear appears in slightly different language, but unmistakably the same anxiety. By the time the Book of the Dead was fully codified in the New Kingdom, the chapter on thirst had been a continuous feature of Egyptian funerary literature for over 1,000 years. It survived every dynastic transition, every theological reform, every shift in religious fashion. It kept being copied because it kept being relevant. Water offerings were among the most fundamental burial provisions. Not wine first, not bread first, water, because wine and bread were wants. Water was a condition. And the Egyptians believed, with absolute specificity, that the afterlife required the same biological minimum the living world did, and that the dead could suffer from the same things the living suffered from, and that the solution was the same kind of preparation. Here's what I want you to sit with. Fears that survive long enough to be codified in a civilization's official religious literature are not abstract fears. They didn't come from philosophical speculation. They came from experience, collective, repeated, personally witnessed experience. The ancient Egyptians feared thirst in the afterlife because dying of thirst in the desert was a documented, recurring, historically recorded kind of death. Real roads, real people, real tallies of who didn't come back. They knew what it looked like from outside. Some of them had felt the beginning of it from inside on a long crossing with a jar running short and no stele close enough. And they carried that forward into the biggest question any civilization ever asks, which is what happens after. If the afterlife was another journey, and the Egyptians were profoundly and specifically convinced that it was, then thirst was a risk there too. And the Egyptian response to a known risk is always the same. Identify it. Write down the procedure. Pack the equipment. Ask the appropriate authority to intervene. The spell in the Book of the Dead is the theological version of the stele on the desert road. Same fear. Different territory. The same human instinct running in both directions. Whatever can kill you, you do something about it before it does. Let's take a step back. 3 things worth holding. First, Egypt's management of desert thirst was not improvised and not occasional. It was a sustained national logistics system running across 3,000 years. Water infrastructure road networks, watering stations, expedition ration formulas, surveyed routes, managed oases was treated as a core state obligation in the same category as grain storage and military provisioning. When the system failed and people died, the state read the numbers, made a decision, and built the infrastructure to bring the number down. The well at Kanais was the consequence of a pharaoh reading a mortality report and deciding the figure was unacceptable. Second, the body knowledge was real and functional even without the underlying science. Egyptian expedition planners couldn't name the mechanism of dehydration, but understood its consequences precisely enough to build a working ration system across 30 dynasties. The number of jars per man per day was not intuited. It was calibrated at the cost of the expeditions whose administrators had gotten it wrong. The math is in the inscriptions. So are the consequences. Third, the fear ran all the way down and kept going. It entered the funerary texts. It became a chapter in the Book of the Dead. It became water offerings placed in the hands of the dead. You can read the specific terror of the Eastern Desert crossing in Egyptian afterlife literature, written by people who understood that terror not as an abstraction, but as something they had watched happen on real roads to real people, and who wanted their gods to make sure it didn't follow them into the next world as well. The spells against thirst in the realm of the dead are the oldest anxiety document in the world. They were written by people who had been on the road. The last time you drank something, you didn't think about it. You just reached for it. Tap, bottle, glass, whatever was nearest, and the whole transaction was so automatic you barely registered it as a thing you had done. The Egyptian crossing the eastern desert in 1280 BC was running the same biology you run when you're thirsty. Same signals, same urgency, same system that hasn't changed in 100,000 years of human bodies moving through hot places. The biology is identical. The need is identical. What was different is that his survival on that road depended entirely on whether someone had done the work before he arrived, whether a pharaoh had read the death toll and ordered wells, whether an administrator had calculated the ration and written it into the procedure, whether an engineer had walked the road, measured every gap, and carved the location of the next well into stone where the light would catch it and the man coming through couldn't possibly miss it. All of that had happened. And so he drank. He made it to the mines. He came home. And he almost certainly never gave the stele a second thought, because the stele was just the stele a fact of the road. Something that had always been there as far as he was concerned. The water was there because someone had decided the problem was worth fixing, which, if you think about it, is the only reason water is ever anywhere. So here's my question. A single eastern desert crossing. One jar of water. One direction. A stele on the road marking the next well at 20 kilometers. Would you make it? Let me know in the comments. Until then, see you soon.